Hello, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of Friends Occasionally Not Disagreeing, the Fawn Pod, the Fawn Cast. This is Cody, and I have finally another installment in our James Bond 60th anniversary series watch along. This is our 22nd entry already in this series, and this is the final movie for Mr. Pierce Brosnan. This is Die Another Day. An interesting film. This is one I had not seen either, even though it's a more recent one from 2002. I did not enjoy something about this movie, which I'll get to in just a second here. But overall, it's a solid outing for Pierce Brosnan in his final go round here as James Bond. Is it enough to make it classic, or is this unfortunately going to be another entry into our crap films here in the series? Let's take a look. All right, we're going to start off today with our title and theme in this one. The movie here again is called Die Another Day. We're well into the film plots at this point that are way past Ian Fleming's original novels. They're just kind of taking strands of different things from here and there. This one has kind of, I don't know, elements of maybe Moonraker, Man with the Golden Gun, etc. This has some connections to some earlier movies, not plot-wise, but just in terms of ideas within the plot itself. The title of this one, Die Another Day, is interesting because it is probably referring to a villain that we'll talk about here in the plot that appears to be dead earlier in the film, but in fact comes back later in the film. A couple of them, actually, as it turns out. And, I'll just not die today, I'll die another day kind of type thing. Nothing super deep to this, but it's a cool phrase, die another day. It's another one of these that kind of isn't really played up in the movie for any reason. It's just what it is, I guess. So 3 out of 5, it's average. It's okay. There's been better. There's been worse. So there's that. On to the theme of the movie. This is Madonna, who not only does the theme for the film, but also shows up as a small role in a fencing school later on in the plot. So that's kind of cool. I don't know if we've seen somebody who's done the theme appear in the movie. Also, it's possible I'm forgetting someone at this point because I am, as I said here, 22 films into all of this. So in terms of the theme in this one, it has very heavy late 90s, early 2000s vibes to it. It kind of sounds like techno dance music. A lot of the stuff in this film did feel very time period dated with some of the special effects and the slow-mo and definitely some, Matrix style influences here in how this is presented to the audience, which I was talking to my wife about this, and unfortunately, I don't really have a category to rate this movie on presentation. If I did, I will pre-tell you the score would be lower because the slow-mo effects, the rapid pans, the overlay of what seemed to be some pretty terrible special effects over top of things would lower this movie down a decent chunk, I feel like. So I'm going to give the final score tonight with a little grain of salt because I just don't have a category for presentation because it hasn't really been an issue in the earlier movies. I mean, this is, like I said, the 22nd movie, and there hasn't really been something like this in the series yet. So tonally, this feels very much like the rest of the Bond movies, but presentation-wise, this just seems real different. It's definitely heavy influence from the time period again. Back to the theme music, though. It's awful. It is absolutely awful. We are just coming off of ranking the Bond themes. If you checked out our main episode this week, and if you did listen to that one, you will know that this is my least favorite of the Bond themes. Of the 25 mainline Bond movies, this is by far, and it's not even close, the worst Bond theme. So if I'm grading this fairly, and if I'm grading this on the same scale for 10 points as I have all of the other ones so far in the series, I have to give this one a 2 out of 10 for being awful. And that's going to be huge because the rest of this movie is pretty serviceable, to be quite honest, but the theme is so bad, it's going to drag this movie down. How far will it drag it down? Into crap category? Let's keep it going. Our three performance categories here. We have Bond, the women, and villains. Let's start with Bond on this one. As mentioned, this is Pierce Brosnan's last outing as James Bond, and it's a shame because I haven't done my final averages for the Bonds yet. I won't do that until I get through Daniel Craig, but Pierce Brosnan has been very steady and very fantastic in his performances, and he gives another one here. 14 out of 15 for Pierce Brosnan. He has a magic mix about him that the other Bonds have not had, and yes, that includes Sean Connery, where he is believable in terms of being suave and debonair for the ladies. He is able to have a little bit of wry when he says the one-liners and the puns in these movies. He's also pretty good with the physical stuff, and he's very believable and imposing as Bond himself. Like, he stands and looks good on screen when he talks to Judi Dench and these other characters as Bond. This is just kind of what you would picture James Bond to be. Whereas I feel like the Bonds before him definitely had their own thing going for them, but aren't quite as good of a mix as all of this, right? So I'm thinking Dalton was a better physical Bond. Roger Moore was a better comical Bond. Lazenby was a better, maybe looking Bond. And Sean Connery was kind of I don't know, he's kind of the proto Pierce Brosnan, I guess, in a way. He had physicality to him as well, but just doesn't seem to fit the role, as much as that sounds weird. Because he's the iconic Bond. But I also think if you were somebody who grew up with Sean Connery as your primary Bond, this probably would be, still your bread and butter. But we'll go through a full analysis of this when we get done with all this here. And as you mentioned, I'm trying to get through the rest of all things Bond, my GoldenEye playthrough, and also the rest of these movies before the end of the year to honor the 60th anniversary. That's kind of my goal here. Okay, next up, we have the women in the movie. Having not seen this before, I actually did have to pay attention here because I didn't know for sure which way this was going to play out. It seemed like the twist they were going to do was going to be the ultimate twist, and it did kind of play out the way I thought it was going to. But we had a couple women here who looked like they might be the main Bond woman. But primarily here, this is ultimately going to be Halle Berry's role as Jinx, which is it's a pretty cool name. Jacinta Jinx Johnson as an NSA from America agent. All right, so National Security Agency. She plays Jinx, and she is not in, again, a first chunk of the movie. She shows up once or twice after that, and then she's there for like the final third of the movie, basically, at that point with Bond. So maybe is dinged just a smidge from screen time here, but she does actually get scenes, which we don't always get that. Like, what I mean is there are actual scenes where we're looking at things from her perspective and Bond is not even there, which is, definitely not the case for a lot of these ladies in their films. I think she does a pretty serviceable job in terms of the physical stunts that she's doing here. You can, of course, always make the argument as far as, stunt actors and actresses used in these films, but I'm not rating the actor. Remember, I'm rating the character here for the Bond women. So Halle Berry, obviously very good looking. I know a lot of people are super high on her. She's not necessarily as high on my cup of tea. I'd much rather have like a forgetting here. Oh my gosh, name from earlier. Crap, I can't think of her name right now, but some of the older ones actually were some of my higher scores in terms of just pure beauty. But she's good looking. She gets the job done, and she's very good in her role. So actually, she is going to get a tie for our highest score for women, just because she does have her own screen time and she does have a decent plot, and she also has, the ability to do the physical things to stand up with Bond here in the end of this. So 12 out of 15 for Jinx. And that ties her, as I said, for highest Bond lady with 5 movies to go. So we'll see when we wrap this all up if she's at the top. All right, next up is villains. Interesting villains in this one, which we're going to have to get into with the plot. But we have Gustav Graves, who is the primary antagonist here, who is not who he seems to be. We have Colonel Moon, which we'll talk about here in a second as well, who is a really imposing guy for most of the movie, who has like these metal shards in his face, like shrapnel. Pretty cool looking villain. He looks like a zombie at times. He's pretty sweet, pretty good at combat. And then we have Miranda Frost, who is played by Rosamund Pike, who we just reviewed in the Wheel of Time series, where she plays Moraine. And she looks so young in this movie. Oh my gosh, I didn't check how old she was here, but she looks so young. So she must be really, really, really young at this point. I don't know how old, but it's got to be early 20s or something. I mean, she looks like a teenager in this movie, basically. But they're pretty cool little trio. There's some twists and turns, as I mentioned here, which we'll get into with the plot. But I thought they had some cool ideas, some cool motivations all around the world here in terms of what they were trying to do. And they each kind of have their own specialties within the three of them as well. And I just thought, Gustav Graves is obviously probably, well, maybe, I don't know actually who's given the most screen time here, because Frost is in some scenes with Bonds. Colonel Moon is in a lot of those action sequences. So I guess the screen time is chewed pretty equally between the three, but Graves is the main villain here. Altogether, they're a pretty imposing trio. I like them a lot. They work together well. 8 out of 10 for our villains, which is one of our higher scores that they've had here. So good job to the villains in this movie. Okay, let's talk about the plot in this one, because as mentioned, we do sort of get some ideas that are recycled maybe from earlier movies, but somewhat forgiven because we can't have, just the same exact plot or something brand new every time. It's just harder to do when you're 20 some movies into the series here. So let's take a look at the plot. I'm going to again kind of take a peek here at Wikipedia in terms of a little bit of help for this one, though I just watched this one last night, actually, so it's pretty fresh in my mind, and I did watch it in one setting as well, which is great. P.S. here, I was just kind of curious. I did look up Rosamund Pike, who is born in 1979, which the movie came out in 2002, so probably was filmed in 2001, let's say. So she probably was about 22 when she started this. So she started acting in 98. So yeah, she was a baby. She was young when she did this one. Okay, here's the plot. We start off with something we have not seen, I don't think, in a Bond movie, which is Bond surfing in a dry suit up to the North Korean shore, and we get kind of some stunts on some waves here, which I think that was new, which is refreshing to not have, a scuba sequence or parachuting sequence or a skiing sequence, because we get those quite a bit. So I thought this was a cool way to both get into North Korea undetected and a new thing that we have not seen before. So, all right, here we go. Bond, MI6 agent, infiltrates a military base in North Korea where we have Colonel Moon trading weapons for diamonds, and Moon's friend Zhao, who's his right-hand man, receives notification of Bond's real identity. Bond was posing as somebody else here. Moon attempts to kill Bond. We get a hovercraft chase, which goes across like the demilitarized zone. There's a lot of Korean history in this movie, I should point out, which I thought was, again, kind of refreshing because it's a different location and one that you might not always touch as a plot because of the politics involved with that. But essentially, it was pretty cool. They had this idea that all of this land is filled with landmines. And so they used hovercrafts to get over all of these, which let them get into areas they wouldn't normally be able to get into because of the landmines left over from the Korean War. So I thought that was kind of a fun way to incorporate history into your plot, which pretty cool. Okay, Bond is captured by North Korea, essentially here, and the colonel's father, General Moon. And then we get something else we haven't seen in a Bond movie, which is Bond is held prisoner for 14 months, which we could maybe try to dissect as far as why they would choose that length of time to have Bond out of action. It was certainly long enough that MI6 figured he was dead at that point. America was kind of involved with Bond being out of the picture, and we have some CIA agents here as well, NSA and CIA agents here in this film. But essentially, Bond escapes, and he's traded for. He doesn't escape, actually. I'm sorry. He is traded in a prisoner exchange for Zhao, and this is the guy who looks like he is has like shrapnel all on his face and looks kind of like a zombie. But anyway, so Bond is traded back to MI6. He's sedated and taken to M, and they kind of have him prisoner. But he has lost his rank in this time, and they think maybe that while he was being tortured, he would have given vital information to the North Koreans, where Bond is saying that there must have been a double agent in the British government who set him up. And so goes our threaded plot line through this movie as far as Bond trying to find someone who set him up, essentially. So keep that in mind. Okay. Bond escapes MI6 and goes to Hong Kong, where he finds out from an old friend of his, a Chinese agent, that Zhao that he's looking for is in Cuba. And so he goes to Cuba, where he first bumps into Jinx. So Halle Berry's character. They go to a gene therapy clinic, not together, but while there, Jinx kills Dr. who is in charge of the therapy, and Bond finds Zhao inside the clinic. They fight. We have Zhao leaving behind a pendant, which Bond finds a bunch of diamonds inside, and there's a lot of hubble in here over whether these diamonds are made by Gustav Graves' Diamond Company or whether these are blood diamonds mined out of Africa, which is mentioned several times in the film, despite Africa not being an actual locale in the movie, which is kind of an interesting plot point to run with if that's not where you're going to take the movie, but nevertheless, here we go. So they have a crest imprinted on them, which is the GG of Gustav Graves, and this is where Bond starts to put the trail to this guy. So supposedly Graves found a vein of diamonds in Iceland, but it seems like these are the blood conflict diamonds of like Sierra Leone and other places in Africa, a la the Kanye West song. So we go to the Blades Club. It is a fencing place, essentially, with swords and all sorts of sword weaponry. Bond finds Graves there and also his assistant, Miranda Frost, who is actually an undercover MI6 agent. We come to find out later. He fences, and then this is Bond and Graves fence, which then turns into a real sword fight, and Bond wins after they basically destroy the club. And impressed, Graves invites Bonds to Iceland for a scientific demonstration. M says, we can get you back to 00 status, and Q gives him some weapons, including a car that has camouflage. At the Ice Palace, Graves unveils a new satellite he has, which is diamond and mirror based, called Icarus, which is able to basically focus the solar energy of the sun onto a tiny area. And his theory is that it could provide year-round sunshine for agricultural purposes. Of course, that's not at all how this plays out, because in reality, it's going to be used as a death ray. Okay, Bond seduces Frost, who had resisted all agents in MI6 prior to this. Jinx is back in here, infiltrating the command center, but she's captured. Bond rescues her and finally discovers the big thing here, which is that Gustav Graves is actually Colonel Moon from the beginning of the film. So this was kind of a cool twist, especially because you're going to go from somebody who is a not predominantly, is an Asian character to somebody who looks very Caucasian. And that's kind of a cool twist, I think. But he used the gene therapy to change his appearance, and he has been collecting the blood diamonds out of Africa as a cover for his base here in Iceland. Bond confronts Graves, but at this point we find out that Frost is the actual traitor who betrayed him to the people in North Korea. So she does not work for MI6. She's actually a double undercover agent. Nice little twist there for Rosamund Pike. Bond escapes, and he comes back to rescue Jinx. who was basically in the giant ice palace that he had constructed for this, and she was drowning in her hotel room essentially because she couldn't get out. Pretty long car chase in here. It's pretty fun, and Bond is driving one car, Zhao is driving another car, and they're driving upstairs and through the passageways in this giant ice palace. And finally, Bond basically makes his car turn invisible, and he kind of climbs up the wall while Zhao is about to ram him off a cliff. And Bond jumps out of the way with his car. Zhao flies over the cliff, and that's basically the beginning of it. And then a giant ice chandelier falls onto Zhao to kill him. Bond smacks the wall down in Jinx's room, saves her, runs her over to the geothermal springs, barely revives her, and she comes back to life. So now we have a 2-on-2 with Bond and Jinx, who are, again, presented as almost equals in this, which I really appreciated because that's something I have been harping on through most of these movies, is we really do see the sexism with how characters are presented. So I'm excited to see the Daniel Craig ones again, to see if the ladies in there are more treated as equals than these earlier films. And P.S. on that, I should mention, I know I've seen Casino Royale several times. I think I've seen Quantum of Solace once. Spectre, I think I saw once. Skyfall, I think I've seen once. And I have still never seen the last Bond movie, No Time to Die. So all those to come. Okay. Bond and Jinx jump aboard a cargo plane that has the villains on it. And this is where we get a kind of a villain scene here where Graves reveals to his father, the leader Moon, that who he really is and why they really have the Icarus satellite and its true purpose, which is to cut a path through the landmine fields in the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, and allow the North Koreans to invade South Korea and finally unite the peninsula. His dad does not react the way he thought he would, and General Moon rejects the plan, but Graves then murders his own father. So then we get a fight here as Bond attempts to shoot Graves, and we have a gunshot that pierces the plane wall, which causes the decompression and starts to fall out of the air. Bond and Graves fighting in a fist fight while Frost and Jinx are fighting as well. Jinx kills Frost, finally, with a knife to the heart. And so that's the end of Rosamund Pike. Halle Berry wins. And then meanwhile, we have Graves trying to jump out of the plane by parachute. But Bond pre-opens the parachute, which then is yanked by the wind and pulls Graves into one of the turbines, basically, which destroys the engine and basically is causing the plane to crash, also disabling the Icarus beam as well, because I believe Graves had the mechanism on him to control that at that point, like a glove almost, like the Power Glove from Nintendo. And so Bond and Jinx are sailing to their death down as the plane crashes, but luckily they find a helicopter in the back of the cargo hold with all of the diamonds, and they manage to predictably get in the helicopter. It flies down, gets real close to the ground, but they do manage to get the helicopter turned on, land safely at a temple, and they spend the night together at a Buddhist temple with Bond seducing Jinx while Halle Berry is covered in diamonds. So diamonds are forever. You got it right. Here we go. Okay, so that's the plot. I kind of liked a lot of this, which was like the hidden identity, the double agency type thing. I even thought for a sci-fi element, the Icarus ray was kind of a cool idea. There's maybe some things that don't quite make sense in here, the gene therapy and some other things as well. It was a solid plot, if not stellar, I thought. So I'm going to give this a 20 out of 30 for the plot score, which is, I mean, that sounds rough because it's only 67%, but it's about average for the movies we've looked at so far. And then for our action in this film, it was solid, really, really solid. 14 out of 15. And I covered a lot of the stunts already here today, but I really thought it was good. And then as far as choosing a favorite line tonight, I have to go at the end because we had a scene here where Halle Berry and Pierce Brosnan were falling to their death in the plane at the end of the movie. And Halle Berry basically says something about, we're both going down. And then at the end, once they're seducing each other in the temple, then Bond brings it back up and says, now what was that about us both going down? You dog, you. All right, scores tonight to wrap this one up. We have 14-20, 8-12, 14-3, and unfortunately only 2 for the theme on this one. Still good enough to give Die Another Day a 73. So if you think about our third place movie right now is 78. If the theme had been better, it would have been a real shot to make our top movies. However, to counterpoint that, if there was a way to take points off for the presentation of this movie, I would definitely dock it because a lot of it has not aged well with the effects and other things they used here. All right, that has been Die Another Day, ladies and gents. We got 5 to go. The Daniel Craig era. We'll get to that hopefully soon here before the end of the year. Till then, everybody, take care. This has been Cody, another of our James Bond 60th anniversary watch-along series. Hope you're all doing well out there. We're headed to the holidays. Much peace, love, and happiness to you and your friends and family, to all of us here at the Fawn Pod, the Fawncast, friends occasionally not disagreeing. We'll see you later.